Okay, welcome everybody who has joined us for our joint ChemPhysChem and ChemSystemsChem Virtual Symposium on Computational Chemistry. Just before starting, I just want to thank our moderator, Wolfram Koch, and also our three speakers for spending the afternoon, or in the case of Gabriel, spending the morning with us. So I'm quickly going to introduce our moderator to you, and then Wolfram will take over for the rest of the presentation. So Wolfram Koch of the German Chemical Society, or the GDCh, will be moderating today. And many of you will remember him as a computational chemist. He studied at the Technical University of Darmstadt and then also in Berlin, and ended up getting his PhD from the Technical University of Berlin with Helmut Schwarz. And after that, he moved over to the US and worked at IBM as a postdoc. And after that, as a senior scientist at IBM here in Germany. And after that, he moved back to the Technical University of Berlin as a professor of theoretical chemistry. And in that time, he also wrote this book, A Chemist's Guide to Density Functional Theory. And I don't know about you, but while I was doing my PhD, I practically slept with this book under my pillow. And I'm sure it was like that for many of the people in the audience as well. So, and now for the past almost 20 years, Wolfram has been the executive director of the German Chemical Society. And in this time, under his care of the society, the German Chemical Society has grown to over 30,000 members, which makes it one of the largest chemical societies worldwide and definitely the biggest one in the European Union. And also the whole scope of the society and everything expanded so that it really serves the entire chemical community in Germany. So from school children all the way through to pensioners, and also covering academics and industrial people working in industry. And an important part of that is also the publishing program that the GDCh does alongside Chemistry Europe, of which ChemPhysChem and ChemSystemsChem are a part. So I definitely, as editor of these two journals, am very happy and very proud that we have this collaboration and this partnership. So so I hope that you enjoy our show this afternoon, and I'm passing over to Wolfram for the introductions of the speakers. Wolfram, I think you're on mute.
Thank you very much. That's what always happens. So again, thank you very much, Greta, for this very kind introduction and sort of the looking back to my past as being a computational chemist myself, which is, as you said, quite a number of years ago now. Maybe I just say one more word or one more sentence to Chemistry Europe, because that is in principle your host of today's virtual symposium. Chemistry Europe is a fairly unique organization, I would say, because it is a group of 16 chemical societies of Europe who banded together about 25 years ago to start a very ambitious publishing program in chemistry, which up to now includes 19 journals, which cover almost everything in chemistry, even though I have to say I am still waiting for a journal explicitly devoted to computational theoretical chemistry. So, but these aspects are up to now covered mostly by ChemPhysChem, and that's also why ChemPhysChem is among the journals which sort of are the ones organizing today's symposium. And as Greta has said, the GDCh, the German Chemical Society, has been among the founding organizations of Chemistry Europe, and we are still a very proud partner here. And I'm of course also very happy about our publishing partner, Wiley VCH, which does all the organizational things, administrative things, which are related to the publishing of all these journals. In addition, I very much enjoy to have the opportunity to moderate this session, because computational still is very close to my heart, even though I have to admit I'm not reading all the important articles that are being published these days in computational chemistry. And this is also a reason why I so much enjoy being here, because we have today 3 very prominent computational theoretical chemists among us who will share their recent research with us, and that is certainly something at least I am looking very much forward to. So that should be enough for the beginning. Before I start introducing our first speaker, I just want to remind all 3 speakers that we have a fairly tight time schedule. You all have 20 minutes for your talk, and then we will have some 5 minutes for questions and answers afterwards. And I will give you a 3-minute warning when you have been talking 17 minutes, so then you have 3 more. And I hope very much that we will all be able to keep our time management as well as possible. So now let me introduce our first speaker, who is Markus Reiher from the ETH in Zurich, who will give us a talk. Have you ever pulled on a molecule? I haven't. Chemical reactivity by interactive and automated quantum mechanics. That sounds very exciting, and I look very much forward to this. But before that, a very short introduction of what Markus has done so far. He received his PhD in theoretical chemistry from the University of Bielefeld in 1998 in the group of Jürgen Hintze, a very famous theoretical chemist. And then after his habilitation, he went to Bernd Hess at the University of Erlangen, who unfortunately passed away much too early. And then after his habilitation, also stayed in Erlangen for some time as a private docent before he went to Bonn and then to a professorship at the University of Vienna, where he worked until he moved to the ETH in 2006, which is now also 15 years ago, Markus. And you have been staying there since and have been working on quite a number of very, very exciting topics in computational and theoretical chemistry, and some of them have to do with pulling a molecule. So please tell us now how it feels to pull a molecule. Markus.
Yes, welcome everybody.
And don't forget to share your slides.
I will. Thank you very much for the kind introduction. So these are my slides. Just a second, I will switch in a moment to, okay, now you should see me again, and now I switch to presentation mode. Okay, so this is my first slide. As you have already heard, the title of the talk is "Have you ever pulled on a molecule?" And I mean this quite literally, as you will see. But the talk is about chemical reactivity and basically how we compute chemical reactivity. And as you can also see, will be about interactive and automated quantum mechanics. So let's see what this is all about. I should restrict myself a little bit, and that is my understanding of chemical reactivity in this context, at least, is that I'd like to map out a reaction mechanism. At the moment I have the reaction mechanism, I basically understand what's going on with the chemistry of some system. And so in principle, we could encode any molecular function in such a network of chemical transformations. And so this is kind of a state-to-state understanding, right? We start from reactants, we go through intermediates, we end up at products. And that can also be for more complicated systems as a Markov state model. But this is a way, in this talk at least, I'd like to think about chemical reactivity. And so the idea is mapping out with computational tools these reaction networks. And you see here a sketch of a reaction network, and I just like to draw your attention to the fact that in chemistry we talk about reactions and compounds, but when we talk about computational chemistry, computational quantum chemistry, we map out individual structures, and so we talk about individual conformers and about elementary steps connecting them. So there is more to the to the network in computational chemistry, and that should be highlighted here. Okay, and so basically what we do is we use algorithms to map chemistry, right? And computer simulation is the key to solve the many particle equations of physics and chemistry. And this is my only basically my only equation, and this is the equation on which my talk is based, and that's the electronic Schrodinger equation. So it's Pass-Born-Oppenheimer approximation, and I just want to give you the rough idea that this is damn complicated. And what it makes it complicated is not only the fact that it's high dimensional, but it is also written for an arbitrary number of particles. So because before we start, we actually don't know for how many particles we are going to solve this equation. But the key point here is, and this is written here at the bottom, it assigns an energy to a given molecular structure. And this gives us a key to sort structures with respect to energy in the end. How, well, this is actually basically known for a very long time, right? As you can see here in this quotation by Dirac, that's from 1929, a year after he formulated his equation, which is now kind of the basis of chemistry. And he said that the underlying physical laws necessary for the mathematical theory of a large part of physics and the whole of chemistry, think about that, the whole of chemistry are thus completely known. And in fact, this is basically true. I mean, there are modifications to this, but this is basically true. And so this knowledge dates back to the 1930s, right? When the pioneers of quantum mechanics received Nobel Prizes for their achievements, but it took decades to solve these complicated equations, by contrast to what Dirac was actually hoping in 1929, that one might find easy ways to solve them. And we do that on computers. This is actually a very old slide from 2014, in-house or at central computing facilities. So it costs quite some computational time, right, to solve these equations. But what we basically do is this, on this slide, which I call the current practice in quantum chemistry. So we have a molecular structure, and we modify this molecular structure. And that is actually what a chemical reaction is all about, right? Then we solve this, electronic Schrodinger equation after Born-Oppenheimer approximation. Now you see it in the compact form, where I don't annoy you with all the variables. And once we get this key quantity, the electronic energy, we can even calculate the forces on the atoms by taking the negative gradient, right? And then we do a structure optimization to find stable intermediates and also transition states. That's what we do. So from structure, we get to energy and property and function. Now I'd like to restrict myself a little bit further, because I'd like to talk about chemical reactions, reactive systems, and look at them as typically local events. I think this is widely accepted, that when you break in an elementary step 1 or 2 bonds, that there are not that many atoms involved. Say you need about 100 or 200 that should be described quantum mechanically, and then there is some environment, right? And that allows you to get a pretty good picture of your system. And of course, I guess you know that this led to the so-called multi-scale approaches, for which Karplus-Levitt and Worschel received the Nobel Prize in 2013. Let me give you one example just to tell you why we are doing all of this work. This is a metalloenzyme, the iron-iron hydrogenase, which we studied about a decade ago, that can produce molecular hydrogen, and obviously that's interesting for sustainable energy production. And you see that in this enzyme, there's the active site. The active site is an iron-sulfur cluster. The iron atoms are in brown. The sulfur atoms are all in yellow. And actually, the catalysis takes place here at the distal iron atom. And people have been studying this experimentally and theoretically for years. But the problem is that the thing drops dead when it sees oxygen. And of course, people try to make it resistant against oxygen and decomposition because of oxygen attack. And so you see the active site here again. You see the Lewis structure of the active site, where we have the iron sulfur cubane here, and here again on the right-hand side, the distal iron atom, which is the catalytic site, and which is also the site where the oxygen attacks. The problem is that when oxygen attacks, it's transformed to reactive oxygen species. And when you want to map out the whole mechanism in order to understand what's going on, as the first step for preventing degradation of this cluster, making the enzyme inactive, well, you need to go through many computational investigations and mapping out a huge number of elementary steps. And that has to do with the combinatorial explosion that we typically face. So typically, we need to look at different model sizes. We have many reactors, because there are very many different reactive oxygen species, not only O2, but hydrogen peroxide, the OH radical, O2 minus, and so on. There are different protonation states and sites. There are numerous intermediates to look at, various charge states, different spin states. different local spin distributions in the clusters, different conformations, and this is all combinatorial. So in the end, you need to do thousands of calculations. And how do we do that these days? Well, we do that manually, which is kind of crazy. You see this picture of the button presser from Walter Crane, which says fancy portrait of the human being of the future. But this is what we do, right? And it's totally annoying. The question is, do we really need to do that? Don't we waste our time? So what we believe is, and what we have been working on, is kind of a tailored virtual environment which improves on this situation. So we need kind of an integrated software which allows us for easy structure manipulations, calculations, and analysis, up to the point where you don't need to do the boring calculations. Because when you think about doing a calculation, well, if you do that on a regular basis, you're most likely annoyed because you need to do always the same things, right? And that is an indication that it can be automated. If you don't do computational chemistry and you have never done so, there might be this barrier, which is this technical barrier that does not allow you to step into the field. So for experts and non-experts, this is a problem. And so what we intend to do here is to combine automated and interactive exploration. Automated in the sense that the computer does what you otherwise would have to do manually, and interactive in a sense that you need to talk quickly to the computer to see what's going on in your computational exploration. That also requires fast simulations. Fast simulations typically means inaccurate simulations, so you need error assignments. You need to know how good you are. And then automated refinement, just in case. But that will allow you in the end to experience the response of your molecular system in real time. And that gives you really a new level of chemical intuition. And I like to convince you that this is really the case. So this is kind of the framework that we are talking about. We have an interactive exploration where it should allow you to interact easily with the computer. There's an automated exploration where the computer does things that you don't want to do manually because it's just cumbersome. And then all of this talks to a reaction network, which in a rolling fashion maps out a complicated reaction mechanism. If necessary, there needs to be automated benchmarking and refinement that can be done in the background offline without your input, and so that in the end you can do kinetic modeling. Let's start with the first issue here, interactivity, before we come to the automated procedures. So what we would like to do here is we would like to exploit human efficiency in easy-to-use human-machine interfaces. Right? Considering that a computer mouse is okay, right? but already a keyboard can be quite annoying. And that brought us to the definition of what we call real-time quantum chemistry. That is, say, what if you can do a quantum chemical calculation that is so fast in terms of energy and gradient, which is a force calculation, upon a manipulation of a molecular structure, that you experience the information flow from the results from the calculation without any time delay. And for sure, if the calculation is so quick, you can't store it on file and then later look at it. You might need to come up with different ways. And this is one. And as you can see, there is some sort of screen or virtual reality on the right-hand side, a human hand which interacts with a hardware input device. And this hardware input device is not only an input device, but also an output device. It's a force feedback device. So I can transmit also information from the calculation back to my hand, and that would be force information. So I can actually touch molecules and feel their response in terms of the force. We have done that already in 2008 with a simple model system, just showing this to you so that you can get an idea of what the progress in the field is. This is with a water molecule and a proton, and that was just a toy model to play around with the machine. You see the machine on the top right hand here, but there are different hardware devices to do that. So here on the left, there's a more elaborate machine with better force resolution, although the one that you have seen before on the slide is already pretty good for the purpose. You can think about exoskeletons. You can think about these things that are called lead motion controllers, which control your fingertips as an input device. And you see the lead motion controller is actually this little device in front of the keyboard. It costs $100. Now, how do you gain speed? Well, you can do that with DFT, but with DFT, you need expensive hardware like a GPU cluster. So we have been looking into semi-empirical methods because they are fast, and all we expect is that they are reliable in terms of structure because the energies we can refine later on. And so we have studied all the semi-empirical NDDO-based methods, which are around DFTB-based methods. And in the end, we came up with models that are kind of system-focused, parameterized on the fly with uncertainty quantification so that we know how good they are. And you see here two examples where we did that one where we improved on NDDO approaches by using DFT data to refine these parameterizations, or the second one, which is a system-focused general parameterization scheme of force fields based on quantum chemistry data that you can compute on the fly, which we call SFAM. And then, of course, that is for these models, of course, for the limited reactive system of a few hundred atoms, right? 100, 200, 300 atoms. But of course, like when you think about the hydrogenase system, about heterogeneous catalysis, about MOFs, COFs, there is an environment which can be important, right? And we need to be able to treat that. And for sure, we will use a QMMM approach here, or some sort of embedding. I should say that I omit the work that others are doing. So, of course, when you go to our papers, you will find the full references to what other people are doing. And I focus, because of the limited time that I have, on those things that we developed. So we have a general scheme to do orbital embedding. And we have now a QMMM scheme, which is based on this SFAM force field model that automatically parameterizes, right? I mean, if you have ever parameterized a QMMM model, you know that this is really a pain. And so with this new software, you can do that easily and automatically with very, very little human input. Here you see one of our settings from 2014. We have now different ones with a different graphical user interface, but this is basically how it looks like. You have your structure, which you can manipulate with this hardware device, and that hardware device is controlled here by some menu, and all interesting structures that you visit through your interactive exploration are locked into a reaction network. Here's an example where we have 3 consecutive electrocyclic reactions that produce a natural product here. And that can be done in seconds with the machine. Here you see 2 co-workers from 2014, Alain Vaucher and Moritz Haag, actually carrying out that reaction with this hardware device. Right? And so we have this machine, and we can do these calculations and structure explorations in a very fast time. And that allows us basically to come up with new concepts. One is called molecular propensities. And that is, when you consider that you, in a computational exploration, you typically focus on one Born-Oppenheimer surface, one charge state, one spin state, you might miss important chemistry because you're simply not looking for this. But if you do calculations in a very fast manner, you can ask the computer to run more calculations than potentially needed, and that will help you identify new chemistry. I basically discover new chemistry during your computational chemistry exploration. The example that you see here is a famous example for two-state reactivity. It was studied by Helmut Schwarz in his machine in Berlin, where he had an FeO cation that was reacting with H2 to produce the iron cation and water. You see it on the left-hand side. Iron is again in brown, and you see this exploration where at some point we arrive at this structure, and then since we are looking at other spin states simultaneously, the computer tells you, well, there's another spin state coming close in energy, you better watch out for that. So this two-state reactivity concept you can quickly detect with this machinery. Here's another example where you have a model of a nitrogen fixation complex. This is a model complex of the 2003 shock complex. You see, this is a dinitrogen molecule bound to molybdenum as a central atom, and there are already 2 hydrogen atoms bound to it. Here's an acid which delivers the next proton. And when you pull over the proton to form the ammonia molecule, and you see also that the bond is weakened and the thickness of these tubes is depicted depending on the bond order that is calculated directly from the rate function. But you see there's this ammonia molecule formed about to leave the molecule. But in order to do that, to pull over the proton, you need a huge amount of energy, which is the red curve, right? But at the same time, we look at the reduced species, and you see for the reduced species, that is much easier. And so that's even a crossover point. And so you see that this is, of course, not surprisingly, a proton-coupled electron transfer process, right? But look at the exploration coordinate. This runs from 0 to 5, and that is in seconds. So what I want to say is it takes 5 seconds to figure out, which I think is pretty amazing. You can do more immersion. You can go to virtual reality. Here on the left-hand side, you see a picture of the VR that was created by Dave Globacki in Bristol. It's called Naruka. That can be hooked up to our ultra-fast quantum mechanical engine. And we can basically do quantum mechanical studies in a virtual reality where people in Bristol and Zürich, from Bristol and Zürich, meet in the same virtual reality, looking at the same molecule, which is simulated at a cloud server in Frankfurt, and it is fast enough to transfer the data so that you see this with without any time delay in your virtual reality in Zurich and Bristol at the same time. You can also think about augmented reality settings if you want to see your collaboration partners and so on. So there's a lot that can be done. Now, let me switch to the last topic. I'm much quicker here. Then for the interactivity part, I cut all the technical details. I want to talk about automation and autonomy. So I'd like to exploit automated procedures to a largest extent. Of course, I need stable workflows, and nothing is infinitely stable. So I need also nested workflows to have fallback strategies to the largest extent, meaning up to the point where the computer cannot do it any longer automatically, and then interactivity kicks in, and you will be asked to take a look at the molecular system. So,
Markus,
yes,
3 more minutes.
That's fine. Automated mechanism exploration. I mean, there are different classes available. Many people have worked on it. I'd like to refer you to this review to get an overview. And we have been working on structure hopping based on first principles heuristics. You see an example where we automatically explore the foremost reaction, which is considered to be a prebiotic reaction that produces is a potential candidate for producing sugar molecules. You start from formaldehyde and glycol aldehyde here, and then we create conformers, we restrict conformers, it's to high in energy, then we create reactive complexes, we consider all the orientational degrees of freedom that these complexes have. We figure out what a potential reaction path is, we continue to search for transition states starting from high energy structures here, and then we eventually run an IRC path, right, to see what kind of values are connected. Then we get these gray dots and figure out what kind of compounds have we found. There's a new product C, and we also recovered some of the confirmation from the reactants A and B. And this is the result. So this took less than 2 weeks. These are DFT calculations with a double zeta basis, where you have a complicated reaction network that connects the starting material to a different sized basically organic compounds until you get triosis and tetrosis. Of course, this doesn't talk to you. You need automatic procedures that pull out the information, and this is as an overview of the different paths that lead from the reactant material to basically the simple sugar molecules, to a tetrose molecule. That's my last slide before I come to my acknowledgement. All of this is implemented in the CINVESTAV project. It's basically an open source project, and we release all the software. We have developed more than we have released because we would like to have the software as stable as possible. Everything that we publish will be released eventually the moment we consider it stable enough. The CINVESTAV project has various different features, and let me read some of you to you. So we have this real-time interactive quantum mechanical calculations. We have this immersion-enhanced interactive control that I've shown you through the haptic device. We can have unexpected discoveries through propensity calculations. We have first principle heuristic and unsupervised mechanism exploration in order to cut down the computational cost. We have system-focused self-parameterizing atomistic models to gain accuracy and speed. We basically have a QMMM engine that allows us to move a quantum magnifying glass around. We have fully automated benchmarking, not only coupled cluster, but also basically CAS-SCF type calculations. We have uncertainty quantification because we need to know how good and accurate we are, because in the end we need to compare to experiment. We are working on inverse molecular design, which reverts the direction from not from structure to property, but from property to structure. We are working on kinetic modeling in order to have this stable and basically interleave with the exploration process itself. And we have a conformer stereoisomer generator with graph analysis for inorganic and organic molecules. Probably you know RDKit, but this also works for inorganic molecules. And that's my last slide. Of course, all of this was not done by myself, but by my group. And you have seen some of the names already. Many of the names which are currently working on were not yet on the slides because the papers are still to be published. And that's why I give you all the names of my current group. I'm very grateful to these people because they are very committed and well, they do amazing work. That's all I wanted to tell you. Thank you very much for your kind attention.
Markus, thank you very much. And you did something which I did not expect. You almost kept your time. I mean,
I told you.
Yeah, you told me, but I didn't believe it. So we are at 21 minutes now. So 1 minute more than you were allowed to, but I think that's okay. So thank you again very much.
For Swiss, but never mind.
So please, if you have questions, ask these questions in the chat. And I see there are already a few questions. And I start with the first one by Patrick Zobel, who asked, if you deform your molecule with a haptic device, do you only modify one bond? Can you modify multiple bonds at the same time? Do you follow minimum energy pathways in the non-deformed degrees of freedom?
Yeah, so what you do is you move one atom at a time, because this is what you can pick with the haptic pointer. And then it depends, it takes 10 minutes to get used to it, but then it depends on how quickly you move it. If you move it quickly, you break a bond. If you move it slowly, you drag the molecules through space, right? And this is a way to manipulate it. In the background, there's a continuous structure optimization running, because you're putting energy into the system, and you need to pull out the energy, because otherwise the system would explode. Right, and so this is what's happening. But you know, smoothly you can prearrange the molecule, and you can induce reactions and see what you get. And of course, these are just arbitrary paths on the potential energy surface. And then we can generate a spline representation of the path, and actually we can optimize this path in terms of the interpolation that we do, in order to figure out what the transition state is, and that is then the gas structure for refinement. This is what we do.
And I have another question by Pata Pal, who asked, are you using GPU architecture for the calculations?
No. So this is, you know, then you need special hardware, but everything I've shown you works on your laptop. And this is pretty amazing. Of course, we do that because we can then quickly develop things, right? If it takes a lot of simulation time on a GPU cluster, you're not quick in terms of development. But you know, it's really fun to have this machinery on your laptop at your fingertips. And so this is why we go for semi-empirical and system-focused force fields and so on.
Well, let me make a comment myself. First of all, I really find this absolutely exciting that you, as a researcher, sort of can adopt the role of the molecule of your choice and experience what happens if you approach another molecule. I think that is a dream that every chemist probably had for many, many years. And I remember myself that this crossed my mind long ago, and I thought this would be great if we sort of could do this. And I'm really excited to hear that how much you have advanced in that direction. But of course, and this connects to the question that we just had before, computational resources is at the heart of this, because you need probably as much as computer time as you can only get. My question is, in as much is quantum computing a solution for this?
Yeah, so this is difficult. Actually, we wrote a PNAS paper in 2017 about this.
I remember that, yes.
So maybe you know that currently, and this is true, chemistry is considered to be the killer application for quantum computing, because there's nothing else for which quantum computing can be good. And that has to do with the fact, in order for the quantum computer to be efficient, you need to have exponential speed up. I mean, it doesn't help you if your speed up is polynomial, right? The thing is too expensive and so on. And you need exponential speed up. And energy measurements, like the ones that we have been talking about in this talk, they are of that kind, and they can be done on a quantum computer. The problem is that you need a representation of your electronic wave function in terms of qubits. And I mean, a qubit is a spin orbital. Now you can figure out what you need in terms of a full CI wave function, right, to gain from the quantum computer. And so for interesting problems, like say you have 1,000 basis functions, right? So you will roughly have 1,000 orbitals. That means you need 1,000 qubits. But these are not the physical qubits that the people are currently talking about. These are logical qubits. So they are supported and stable, right? You need more physical qubits. That means you will need, in the end, millions of physical qubits to have this. But say if this comes, and if we have this in our hands, nobody needs coupled cluster any longer, because you don't need all the approximations we won't need any longer, because you just do the diagonalization on the machine in the full basis, and then you get your full CI result. But it will be a long path. So let's talk about this in 10 years.
Great. I'll come back with it. So I have Well, two more questions. Let's see whether we have time to answer both of them. The first one is from Amit Zahu, who first says, fantastic talk, and I agree. I have a question. What is the reliability of the results?
Yeah, so this is why we need uncertainty quantification. So we need to know how wrong we are and where we are wrong. So for instance, what we do is currently we exploit machine learning, but only for the uncertainty quantification. So we always have a quantum model, and then we try to figure out what is the error in the quantum model, right? By comparing to also on-the-fly calculated reference data. So we have cheap data everywhere, but reference data, because it's so expensive, only here and there. And then, for instance, you can use Gaussian process regression. This is what we did in 2018, to figure out where you need to put your reference points so that you basically guess the accuracy for all those points where you only have the cheap data but not the expensive data. And so I think that this is the way to go. You need to know how good your data is, because otherwise it will be pointless.
Well, we are already a bit about over the 5 minutes, but I have one more question from Markus Schauermann, and I ask you for a short answer. Has hydroxymethylene been found when creating the Formose reaction network? What has been suggested by this approach for the first reaction step, starting from formaldehyde?
Yeah, maybe I don't want to comment on this yet, because for various reasons. We were happy to do the exploration, but that was without solvent. It was in the gas phase. It was without catalysts. So we are currently working on a far bigger network. And once we have that, I'd be more than happy to answer that question.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you very much, Markus. And there are at least now 2 issues why we have to come back to you. Maybe not in 10 years, but maybe earlier. So thank you very much again. And that will lead us now to the second talk of today's session. And that is the talk given by Leticia Gonzalez. Leticia studied chemistry in Madrid, where she also received her PhD in 1998, by the way, the same year that Markus also got his PhD, in the group of Manuel Llanes and Ottilie Jameau. She then moved to Berlin, to the Free University, and we just missed by 1 year, because I left in 1998, and she worked for Jörn Manz at the FU, and I can imagine that this was a great time, because Jörn Manz is a great theoretical chemist. She then was appointed professor at the Schiller University in Vienna, and probably you were just the successor of Markus from the years that I read it. Before then, in 2007, you moved to the place, in 2007, you went to Vienna, and then in 2011, I just got the wrong line here. You went to your current place, that is Vienna, the University of Vienna, where you are since then. And you're working on ab initio quantum chemistry and chemical dynamics methods to understand how molecular systems react to light. And that will also be the topic of your talk today, which is entitled Shining Light on Transition Metal Complexes, a Dynamical View. Leticia, please.
Okay. So I thank you very much for this nice introduction. I hope that you see my slides, and you need to see me too. So let's see. Now you should also see me.
Yes,
okay.
We do.
Right. So let's start. Yeah, you said indeed we do a lot of work on trying to understand how molecules react to light, and this is the topic of my talk today. So there are 3 keywords here: light, transition metals, and dynamics. So I would like to work you through about some of the recent examples that we had done in the group about finding how light reacts with transition metal complexes. And okay. And there are a number of reasons why we like transition metal complexes. I think they are very promising for many applications. So the decided states of transition metal complexes can be used for many different applications, many in the solar energy conversion, and also the photochemotherapy, for imaging. You can also ask yourself questions about electron transfer in metalloprotein sensors. I put here a couple of pictures. And I will mostly focus in my talk about photosensitizers. So if you are curious about other works done on emitters or radical delivery, I put you here a couple of references that you can just have a look at. Now, transition metal complexes, they are quite difficult monsters to deal with, and this is for different reasons. First, you have a lot of different type of excitations that you need to describe with quantum chemistry, like metal center transitions and metal ligand transfer transitions and ligand metal transfer transitions, and etc., etc. And this is not even, you have a lot of those different transitions, but very often they are all mixed together. And when you have transition metals, you have a lot of degeneracies. So this also makes your life not very easy. Actually, you have a lot of internal conversion processes and intersystem crossing processes that they need to be considered at the same time. Also the size. I mean, most of these interesting realistic molecules that our colleagues from chemistry would like us to study, they are really very large. And this is also a problem that we have. And also theoreticians love to have gas phase reactions, but chemistry, of course, in the environment. So you also have to live with all these problems if you want to study transition metal complexes. So if I would just summarize it, I would say, well, I mean, the problem is we have a lot of electronic excited states of many different characters, and probably they are all together almost degenerated, and you have many different nuclear coordinates that you have to deal with. So the other keyword in my title was dynamics. So we want to do dynamics, we want to follow the nuclear dynamics to see what the molecule really is doing on time. And for this, we need a tool. And I will just introduce this tool right away. So maybe some of you already know, I mean, this is, we have a code which is called SHARC, and SHARC stands for surface hopping, including arbitrary couplings. And this is something that we studied already 10 years ago, time flies. And the idea is we have a quantum classical method, like surface hopping, that I will just explain in a moment in case you don't know what it is. And that instead of like it's typically only including non-adiabatic couplings, here we have arbitrary couplings. So this means that we are able just to put inside also not only these non-adiabatic couplings, which are able just to mediate the internal conversion, but also spin-orbit couplings that they are responsible for intersystem crossing, and if you want, a laser field coupling. So this is just also an open source project. By now it's already in the version 2.1, and you are just happy to, we are happy if you just want to use it. And so I promise that I will tell you what is surface hopping. I mean, this is a concept that it was introduced already 30 years ago by Tully. And the idea is that the nuclei are going to be classical balls. So they're going to be just rolling down as light on the potential energy surface, and only the electrons are going to be quantum. So when you have these degeneracies, when you have points in your potential energy surfaces where you have some couplings, then a quantum object would be able to split, but a ball cannot. So you can hop to one surface or not, and you need a set of different independent trajectories in order to be able, like some of these trajectories will just hop, others will just stay in the same surface, and you can mimic the idea of the splitting of a wave packet. Now, the beauty of these is like any of these balls which are running here down the hill, for each of these points, you can calculate the potential energy surfaces, like the energies and the gradients or the couplings really on the fly. So this means this calculation is very efficient. So this is the idea of Tully, and what we did with SHARC is just to put this arbitrary coupling. So it means that one could use these also to describe ultra-fast intersystem crossing. But by now we had a range of capabilities and possibilities inside the code, and probably I will just illustrate some of these things in my examples. Like you can just follow charge transfer on the fly, you can do population kinetic analysis and time-dependent spectra. You can also include solvation explicitly, and a couple of more fancy things. So without much more, I would just like to show you how we SHARC, and I will just work you through a couple of examples to show you what are the beauties or the challenging things that you have within transition metal complexes, right? So this is a ruthenium 3sp deal. So this is a very well-known case of a light harvesting complex. I mean, most of the photosensitizers that are used nowadays are just derivative of this one. So this was the first molecule that we started working on some years back. Like this was studied by a very talented student and co-worker, Andrew Atkins. And what I will show you now is basically the typical picture you get when you get an average of many different trajectories. So this is just a diagram here of population and versus time. Okay, you see this is a very short propagation, only 30 femtoseconds, and here we have like 15 singlets. I'm going to be always showing singlets in a bluish color and the triplets in a brownish color. And you see you have initially cited some singlets, and they decay very quickly, right? And almost immediately you see that the triplets are populating, right? So you see that there is a very fast ultra fast intersystem crossing. You also see that by the time you are here kind of growing your triplets, it takes a while until you can just populate the lowest singlet state. So maybe you see more if I just compress on a single line all the singlets and all the triplets, and then from this type of graphs you can also fit some time constant, and this would be like the predicted intersystem crossing time constant, like something like 20 femtoseconds, which is, as you see, extremely fast. And I want to show you here a movie how this really looks like. So this is just one trajectory, one representative trajectory. So these are the potential cores in which we are moving, and you see here you have really a thick manifold of the generated states, almost the generated states. So within one electron volt, you have really this 15 singlets and 15 triplets, so it means actually 60 different states. And these states, they are colored here by this spin expectation value. So blue is a singlet, and red is a triplet or brown, and then something in between is something which is not a singlet, it's not a triplet. And you see that this goes very quickly from this blue to this brown. So this is a very efficient intersystem crossing. And now you put attention to what the molecule is doing, it's actually hard to see and to say what the molecule is really doing. So if you wonder why this molecule or this type of molecules, they so efficiently undergo intersystem crossing, you would be very tempted to say, well, it's just because you have this very thick manifold of near-degenerate states, and you also have very strong spin-orbit couplings. Therefore, this is just enough to have intersystem crossing. However, if as a theoretician, you can just do a simple experiments, you can say, okay, I'm going to freeze all my nuclei. Okay, I'm not allowing my nuclei to move, and I repeat these dynamics. And then if you have these frozen dynamics, you see that the amount of population that goes from the singlet to the triplet is very much decreased. So this means that actually, despite the fact that this movement was very, not with the eye very clear to see what the molecule is doing, indeed, the intersystem crossing needs this nuclear movement to be driven. Okay. So just as a fun fact, just to tell you, I mean, these 30 femtosecond simulations, they took 500,000 co-hours. So this is something which is, quite expensive to do. Let me just go to the second example. So now we are a little bit more complicated. We have this rhenium tricarbonyl imidazole phenanthroline complex, but now it's in water. Actually, this molecule was a model for studying electron transfer in proteins. But before starting with the protein, we just had it in water. And this type of complexes, I mean, the way to study that is just to partition the system into some quantum mechanical region. That would be our complex that you can study it with high accurate methods. And then the rest of the environment, like the water, you will just study with molecular mechanics, so with some force field. So we just arrange, develop some electrostatic embedding quantum QMMM strategy, and then this is just an example how this molecule looks for the absorption spectrum. There is not so many states as in the ruthenium trisphipididil example of before, but you have many of these singlet states here. You can just put the singlets and the triplets to run, in Shark. So this is again like something like 100 trajectories for 7 singlets and 8 triplets. And again, you see that these singlets, they decay quite quickly, and triplets, they just rise quite quickly. So again, I can do something similar. I can just put all the triplets and all the singlets together. And now I have a B exponential decay. So actually, I obtain 2 time constants. One is extremely fast, and another is longer. And I can tell you that the first time constant is really electronic. So this is really only due to the fact that you have all these excited states with the spin-orbit coupling. But if you want to have the rest of the behavior here, this like 400 femtoseconds, then you need the nuclear movement. Now, I don't want to go into more detail here, but there were experiments for this molecule, and the experimental time constant that was assigned to intersystem crossing was 144 femtoseconds. So now, if you think about these two time constants, and then you compare with the experiment, I don't know you, but we were quite puzzled or depressed, right? Because for the time of effort, for the kind of effort that we put into these simulations and the time, how time consuming they are in many senses, you would expect to have a better agreement, right? So we just thought for a while why we have, I mean, normally you have experiment and you have theory. Of course, the experiment is correct and the theory must be wrong. And we thought, I mean, we don't really see how the theory can be better. And then we started thinking, well, wait a second. Actually, the experiment means, I mean, you have time-resolved fluorescent up conversion experiments. What you get here is an emission spectrum, right? And that's where the experimental is that we just extract this time constant, this 144 femtoseconds. And we thought, why don't we just do the same thing, right? Because we have this dynamics just in these neutral surfaces, but if you want to look at the emission, then you really have to go a step farther. So we simulated also the emission spectrum. And then when you do that, and then you fit this emission spectrum, et voila, you get a time constant of 154 femtoseconds. And now we're talking, right? Because now you can see, well, these numbers, they agree with each other. So one of the conclusions of this is, well, this time constant is not intersystem crossing, because we saw before that intersystem crossing had a time constant. I mean, you had a very small component of 7 femtoseconds that you cannot detect experimentally, but the intersystem crossing time constant is 420 femtoseconds. But this teaches you that when you do the experiments, I mean, you have to probe them, and then while doing this probing, actually you are looking at a lot of phenomena which are averaged out, right? And then that's when you get this time constant that was assigned to intersystem crossing, but it's not intersystem crossing. So here would be like a very important message. I mean, if you want to compare with the experiment, you really need to simulate the experiment. Otherwise, I mean, you might be comparing apples and pears, right? Another fun fact, I mean, these calculations, they took almost almost a million co-hours. So the question that we stopped to start, the question that we started thinking is, well, if we really want to start studying many of these complexes, we cannot really spend a year per complex and a million co-hours, because this is simply too much. I mean, is there a way to make these things a little bit more straightforward? And one of my co-workers, Felix Plaza, which is now assistant professor in the UK, came up with a very nice idea. There is something which is called linear bibronic coupling model. Right, and this is something very simple. This is just a harmonic oscillator approach. So you have several harmonic oscillators that you're going to shift horizontally and vertically, that you're going to couple with intra and interstate bibronic couplings, right? And it's quite straightforward, because you only need to calculate the normal modes, the frequencies, the excitation energies, these couplings, which is, I would say, the expensive part of it. But whenever you have done this, you have parametrized potentials. And then with these parameterized potentials, and this is a trick that is used very often in quantum dynamics, in much more demanding, expensive quantum dynamic calculations, we can do the same thing with the surface hopping. You have these parameterized potentials, and now you're going to propagate your trajectories. And this is, of course, extremely efficient. So we just get an approach which one also has to think what is good for. I mean, we have an approach which is based on harmonic potential. So of course, you have no anharmonicities. So it's only going to be good around the reference geometry. So this is good if you are going to study rigid geometries, like transition metal complexes, right? Of course, they cannot dissociate, so you cannot have it all, but many of these complexes, they are pretty well behaved, right? On turn, you can have all this full dimensionality, and this is going to be very efficient, and you have no bias that you have to select a mode or another one. And because it's so cheap, then you can afford better level of theory, longer simulation times, more states, more trajectories, everything, right? So this is so efficient, as a matter of fact, that actually basically prevent us to use our Shark. Because in Shark, normally you are interfaced with some many different quantum chemical codes, right? And you spend some time in input and output. And you don't care, because your quantum chemical calculation takes 4 hours, right? So then it doesn't matter if you wait several seconds. But here, this is so efficient that it simply collapses, right? So this forces to develop by Shark. So this means that Shark had to be rewritten totally with Python. So you can see here the Python who has followed the Shark, and now everything goes in memory. You read what you need once, and then you don't spend time in input and output. You generate a lot of output files and material, but you don't spend the time in reading and writing. So let me just illustrate this with the third case. Okay, so now I have again something which resembles this rupee molecule in the beginning, but now I have a disulfide here. So this molecule or this type of molecules are interesting because they are potentially useful for solar fuels. You can do PCT here. You can oxidize with 2 electrons. And then in this type of molecules, I mean, it gets very important to be able to, okay, wait a second, my slide. So I think my screen is frozen. You see the slide, but unfortunately it says not responding. Let's see if it gets back. Can you hear me at least?
Yes.
Okay, you hear me, this is good, but PowerPoint is not responding. This is very annoying.
Well, unfortunately,
okay,
I'm not in a position to do anything. Maybe the technical people should try to help you.
No, it's back. So let's see if
okay.
Okay, so sorry for that. Okay, so this type of molecules, I mean, now it's very important that you are able to distinguish if you have excitations that are into this disulfide ligand or just in the normal bipyridine ligand. Okay, so now how would you do that? So normally you could let's see.
Leticia, 3 more minutes.
Okay, that's bad because my PowerPoint is again hanging, and this is very annoying. I cannot change the slide. That's really very bad. I think I want to wait until the slide comes back.
We certainly will give you that time.
I mean, if I close everything I open, I'm going to spend more time with these. So
that's fine.
That's right.
Well, we all want.
Okay, I try to be fast with this. Okay, so I wanted to say normally you will just look at this type of excitations, you will look at the orbitals, right? And you will just decide what it is. But this is a very boring task. So we have a much more clever way to go. We have something which is called charge transfer numbers. So you look at the charge transfer between different fragments. And you see, I mean, this is the typical inorganic chemistry picture that you have. If you look at the charge transfer between a metal and a metal, there's a metal center transition. If you look at the metal and the ligand, there's a metal ligand charge transfer. So we can identify all the different transitions within the molecules. So here you have an absorption spectrum. You can disentangle the different contributions in this spectrum, and actually you will realize, if the mouse would be working, you will realize that you have here an area. You don't see my mouse anymore, right? There is an area where I'm going to wait until this comes back. Too bad. That this is very green. So these are excitations that go into this normal ligand, and you have here another region, this block 2, where you have a lot of these excitations into this sulfur region. So you can do, okay, it's blocked again. I'm so sorry. Okay, so you can do dynamics starting from this area where you see a lot of green and you see that this evolves into this mixture, or you can start from this energy area where you have 50-50 and this evolves to the same thing. So this is very interesting because it means that despite having these different ligands, if you assign the molecule, then you're going to end up with an excitation into this disulfide ligand, which is just really to do some oxidation. And just to tell you, I mean, this costed something like 1,500 CPU hours. I mean, of course, you have to spend some more time in the parameterization, but this is really great. So I'm coming to the end. I hope I could convince you that now with this tool, I mean, Shark or Shark LBC with parameterized potentials, you can study very efficiently transition metal complexes, which are by definition always big and large, and they have a lot of degrees of freedom. And just a little take-home message: if you really want to compare with the experiment, you should calculate the same observable as in the experiment. And the only thing that remains me is just to thank the people that is in my group that have actually done this all this work, and mainly this was done by Patrick and by Sebastian. And since everybody was just advertising some books, here is the third book that it was also published by Wiley about quantum chemistry and dynamics of solid states. And with this, I want to thank you for your kind attention. I apologize for my PowerPoint, and I'm looking forward to your questions.
Thanks a lot, Leticia. And I have to say, it was just perfect how you managed the difficulties of your presentation. And in particular, you managed to stay in time also. So thanks a lot, and of course, in particular, thank you very much for the fascinating talk. There was one number I was really surprised of when you said in one of those calculations it took 850,000 CPU hours. I did a small calculation that is almost 100 years.
Well, that's the miracle of the parallelization, of course, right? So you have all these different trajectories, and that's why this method is, of course, very popular. If you want to run 100 trajectories, you would just ideally take 100 computers, 100 nodes, and then you would just run this every trajectory in one node. However, this is not enough, right? Because sometimes when you make a calculation for some of these trajectories, you would need 3 months linearly, and you're going to wait for 3 months. And so you need to have a parallelization also on the quantum chemistry. And for this, I mean, we basically depend on how efficient is the particular method, let's say the DFT or whatever it is, how efficient is this parallelized in a particular code. So you have to parallelize strongly, and you have to take a lot of hours. And then I think these calculations still took several months, right? But yeah, in a lot of nodes. And you made the calculation, this is 1 million hours, so it's not that cheap.
Well, but still, 100 years is quite a number, even if in reality it's less because of parallelization. We already have a number of questions. The first one is from Julio da Silva, who asked you, thank you, Leticia, for this very nice presentation. Leticia, is possible study electron transfer processes in a Markus theory context by using Shark?
Thank you very much for this question. I mean, that's something we are trying to do, but not precisely with Shark yet in any, well, okay. So you can just say on brutal force, you can say, well, then I'm going to watch how the electron transfer go from one place to another. I mean, this radium complex actually, the idea is you have it in a protein, and this protein has another metal, and then you excite it, and then there is an electron transfer. And this electron transfer is quite fast, and then you might be able to propagate it, for some time, if you are lucky and you are rich, right? But you have electron transfer processes which take way too long. That is not possible to do it with these expensive tools. Then Shark is not going to help you. I mean, the only beauty of Shark is that you have all these arbitrary couplings. And okay, we have also work in efficiency and utility, but still you are going to propagate for, okay, with LBC, maybe a lot of picoseconds, but never a nanosecond or whatever. So the way that people use this electron transfer and Markus theory, I mean, you need molecular dynamics, but then you are in the ground state, right? So there is not a single answer for all these different problems.
Okay, the next question. Anui Rai asks you how to find an optimum basis set for excited state dynamics of 3D metals.
I will just enlarge your question, how you find the good method at all, right? I mean, the basis set is just half of the story. You need a method and you need a basis set. And you see how expensive these calculations are. So this is the reason why we spend a lot of time before looking and tuning the electronic structure method. So basically, we start doing a lot of quantum chemistry. You try the biggest, the best that you can afford. You try to see what are the potential or possible processes that you might have here, a good description of the system itself, and then you go to the other extreme, think, okay, well, but now with my super expensive CASPD2 triple zeta, whatever, this calculation takes 2 weeks per point, but now I'm going to need 200,000 points, so this is not possible. And you start decreasing everything, but seeing that the quality, at least the qualitative picture, will not change, and then we start dynamics, right? So it has a lot of pre-work of finding the method. I mean, if it's the FT, the functional, if it's the method, whatever, if it's CASCF, the active space. And this is, of course, combined with a basis set and some previous experience or logical sense, or at the end, what is still accurate enough and what still gives me efficiency enough to be able to run these calculations. And I have to say, sometimes we realize it's not possible, it's simply not possible, and then we don't do dynamics. These things are in the drawer until one has quantum computing and you can do it better, whatever. So it's not a trivial question.
Well, it's it's interesting to hear, because that's a kind of a deja vu, because I remember this kind of problem for when we looked at similar systems 20 years ago. So that still is something which remains a challenge. Yeah.
is there, has not really changed. You have more methods and more choices, but your problem is not solved.
Yeah. Okay, then we have 2 more questions, and maybe if you have quick answers, we might be able to address both of them. The next one is from Patapal, and he says, or he asks, pulse laser or continuous wave laser, which excitation can Shark replicate better?
Say it again. What can we replicate better?
Pulsed laser or CW laser? Which excitation can Shark replicate better?
Okay, so this question has a couple of different answers. So first, every simulation that I showed you here didn't have a laser pulse inside. This can be done with Shark, but it's not how it's done here. So we instantaneously put the wave packet or our trajectories upstairs, and that would be something equivalent to have a delta pulse, so that immediately you are exciting everything, right? So that would be the idea, to have a pulse laser. That's what you would do. And a continuous wave laser, I mean, if you want to model this explicitly, you cannot really put the laser explicitly, because this laser is going to be very long, right? And then it's going to be very inefficient to simulate. So the short answer would be the pulse laser, but this was not in any of the simulations, and it can be done, but it's not as trivial as it looks like. I could make a full talk also about this.
Okay, next time we know what you're talking about. All right, and the last question from Michiko Atsumi. Shark, is it effective also for, probably missing here, lanthanides complexes for the excited states? So if you go down further, the periodic table, it gets even more complicated.
Thanks, Michiko, and hi. So you are free, you can do whatever you want if you are able to describe the quantum chemistry properly. So if you are able, you have a method and you know it's reliable for describing the quantum chemistry, I think it's no problem just to go to dynamics. In these cases where you have very strong relativistic effects, and probably also one has to think about which representation one is using here. I didn't talk about this, but it's something that is just behind the scenes. But I mean, if you tell me, okay, we have this method and we have this quantum chemistry is working, and it can be repeated 200,000 times, you can propagate it in time. So the bottleneck is not really on the dynamics, at least with many of these things, not anymore. And for short terms, the bottleneck is on the quantum chemistry. So the question goes back to you, Michiko. If you can simulate this with the quantum chemistry, then one can do dynamics.
All right, thank you very much. And I see also a lot of thank yous here in the chat. And this now leaves me with our third and last presentation for today.
Thank you.
Could you please unshare your, thank you very much. We now come to the presentation by Gabriel Marino from Mexico. Gabriel Marino is a professor in the Applied Physics Department at the Center for Research and Advanced Studies in Mérida in Mexico. He studied at the Universidad de las Americas Puebla and CINVESTAV, I'm sorry for the pronunciation, Zacatenco, and got his PhD there in 2003. He then joined the group of Gotthard Seifert and Thomas Heine in Dresden, so also you have some kind of German experience.
Yes,
where you spent your time as a postdoc before you returned to Mexico in 2005 to take up an independent research position at the University of Guanajuato. Was that more or less correct pronounced?
perfect.
In 2012, you moved to CINVESTAV Mérida, where you are now one of the most active groups in theoretical and computational chemistry in Mexico and Latin America. You spent some time at Cornell with Roald Hoffmann and the University of the Basque Country with Jesus Ugalde, who we also all know in the computational theoretical chemistry arena. Your main interest are the predictions of new chemical entities and the study of central concepts in chemistry, such as chemical bonding and aromaticity, topics which I think are always very exciting because they are really at the heart of understanding chemistry. And also your talk today is very close to that, and it's entitled Predicting New Carbon and Boron Molecules. Gabriel, please take over.
Yes, thank you very much. Thank you very much for the introduction, and thank you to the organizer for allowing me to share our research. So, you know quite well that there are two basic rules to build any organic molecule. So the first is that the maximum coordination number of carbon is 4. This was proposed by Kekulé in the middle of the 19th century. And the second is that the 4 atoms around the carbon, they are placed at the corners of one tetrahedron. So this second rule was proposed by Van Hoffen-Lebel and was really a scientific revolution in the sense that it transformed chemistry from a 2-dimensional to a 3-dimensional science. So the first exceptions of these two rules appears in the 1950 when a Russian lab detected the protonation of methane. So at this time, the problem was really to try to understand how 5 hydrogens are bonded to one carbon. And to answer this, it was necessary to go beyond to the classical model when a bond is formed basically by 2 electrons sharing between 2 atoms. So for the first time, the multicenter bond was suggested, and actually it has a strong repercussions in all the chemistry, particularly in boron chemistry. Okay, so and the presence of these 3-center 2-electron bonds drastically changed the structure and also the structural properties in general of this cation. So, for instance, in this slide, I show you the rotovibrational spectrum of this cation, and I compared with methane and also with the methyl cation, and the difference are really, really significant. So, for the 2 classical molecules, there are around 300 lines, and it's possible to extract the structural information, the bond distances, the angles for this spectra. But in the case of CH5+, it's almost impossible. There are around 1,000 lines, and there is not one pattern, and it's almost not possible to understand the structure. So, and the reason is precisely the presence of these 3-center 2-electron bonds. So these molecules change everything in chemistry. So after that appears a number of interesting molecules with a pentacoordinate carbon atoms, but also molecules with hexacoordinate carbon atoms. And I showed you in this slide some examples that are actually synthesized or detected. So here we have molecules when the carbon is surrounded by lithium, boron, ruthenium, rhodium, or gold. And actually it's not only that the carbons are in the middle of this cage. The carbon is too important to stabilize the cluster, okay? So, so it means that there is a totally different chemistry when the carbon is surrounded by metals, not just for hydrogens or other type of molecule, other type of atoms. So when carbon is surrounded by metals, so there is a very interesting chemistry around. So so it means that it's possible to extend the coordination number of carbons. But what happened with the second paradigms? And actually, it was a study by Rolf Hoffman, and the idea was to try to stabilize actually a transition state with a planar tetracoordinate carbon. So the proposal was that maybe this transition state could be related to the ester mutation of the tetracoordinate forms of carbon. So it's a very interesting transformation. But and for that, they analyze the molecular orbitals of one not existing molecules, the planar methane. And when they analyze this molecular orbitals, so they actually mix the atomic orbitals of carbon and with the molecular orbitals of one hypothetical molecule, this H4, in this particular symmetry. And in this case, there are only six electrons that are participating in the formation of the carbon-hydrogen bonds. And there is one lone pair, actually. So this orbital is not mixed. And this is the reason why, actually, the planar methane is not stable. So, in fact, the carbon-hydrogen bonds requires around 100 kilocalories per mole to be broken. And the difference, energy difference between the planar methane and tetrahedral methane is around 150. So it means that the molecules prefer to be broken rather to be planar. So nevertheless, Hoffman suggests some rules in order to stabilize these planar tetracoordinate carbons. So the first is try to include the carbon in one aromatic system in order to delocalize this lone pair. And the second is to change the hydrogen by metal. So also in order to delocalize this lone pair. Okay. So for some years later, Paul Slayer used these ideas in order to stabilize some viable structures. And actually, he reports with John Popper the first structure with a PTC that it's more stable than the tetrahedral counterpart. So in 1977, Albert Cotton reported in JACS the synthesis and characterization of this peculiar vanadium complex, and it was the first complex with a triple bond between vanadiums. However, Cotton didn't note that this system has one carbon, this one, that is actually bonded to the couple of vanadium atoms and also to a pair of carbon atoms of this aromatic rate. So actually, this is the first compound with a planar tetracoordinate carbon atom. Actually, there is not only one, there are a couple of planar tetracoordinate carbon atoms. So actually, this was noted 3 years later by Kiss. And so there are this is the first example, and right now there are more molecules that are synthesized or detected that contains a planar tetracoordinate atom. Okay, so there are around 1,000 examples, and it's a quite very small number if we compare with the 35 million of compounds that follow the Van Hoff and Lebel rules. For instance, here I have a very small cluster, and when carbon is surrounded by silicon, gallium, or aluminum, it's possible to stabilize such type of clusters. Also, when carbon is the cyclopropane, it's a couple of hydrogens are substituted by lithium. It's possible to stabilize one polymer. And there's one planar tetracoordinate carbon atom. This molecule actually is very beautiful in the sense that it has one pentacoordinate atom, this one, and one planar tetracoordinate carbon atom. Okay, so these systems actually offer the opportunity to push the limits of several concepts in chemistry, the bonding, the structure. So for this reason, we are quite interested in studying such type of system. So our first study on these molecules was published in 2003, almost at the end of my PhD, in collaboration with Miguel Ángel Méndez and Alberto Vela, and we report the smallest cluster containing carbon surrounded by 4 carbon atoms, and all of them at the same plane. Okay, so we actually add a couple of electrons, in the sense, try to simulate some dianions that was published some years before, and actually this stabilized the molecule. So this is a global minimum. So we rationalize in this way. So we have one spiro compounds, and we remove the hydrogen atoms in order to form this tetraanion. And during the rotations, one lone pair in this central carbon is located, and it's possible to remove a couple of electrons from this corner or from this carbon atom. And actually, the computation shows that the most stable system has this structure. So this structure actually has the electronic structure suggested by Hoffman in order to stabilize one planar tetracoordinate carbon atoms. Okay, so we optimize this system using 3 different levels of theory. So the geometry changes slightly, but most importantly, the structure remains a minimum at all 3 levels. So it means that this structure is not an artifact of the method. In order to stabilize the charge, we added some cations around the carbon framework. And in this case, we use lithium, sodium, beryllium, or zinc, because we were afraid that this interaction could drastically modify the structure or break it. So, but this didn't happen, and actually the carbon skeleton experienced just minor changes. And perhaps the most important figure of this couple of manuscripts is this one. So here we show the effects of the counter ions in the energy. And without metal, the barrier to transform this structure to one classical one is quite small. It's just less than 10 kilojoules per mole. And the energy difference between this couple of local minimum is around 180 kilojoules per mole. So this means that this cluster is quite unstable. But when we surround this fragment by lithium atoms, first the barrier increase. Now it's close to 60 kilojoules per mole, and the energy difference between these 2 local minimums is reduced drastically, and right now it's just 20 kilojoules per mole or less. So it means that the metals helps to the stabilization of these unusual fragments. So with this in mind, together with Rolf Hoffman, we propose a series of crystals where metals surround the carbon fragment. With beryllium and zinc, wires are formed where the metal is tetrahedral. Okay, when lithium is used, these fragments are stabilized, and each carbon at the periphery is bonded to one lithium atom. So we also use platinum, and in the case of platinum, that it creates per se planar structures. These metal atoms can bridge a couple of these carbon skeleton, or actually also it can bring 4 of these carbon fragments. So again, these are not a global minimums; they are just like a minimum. But the metals doesn't change drastically the planar structure and stabilize the fragments. Okay. So, however, we were determined to stabilize hydrocarbons with PTC. So we proposed 2 series of hydrocarbons. This is the first one. Okay, all of them are just like a minimum, but the barrier to connecting this structure with some much stable structure ranges from 10 to 25 kilocalories per mole. This means that molecules are actually kinetically stable. But we assume that the unsaturations can induce highly electron delocalization. So for this reason, these systems are actually planar. But when we remove the unsaturations, the stability is maintained and the height of the barriers too. So it means that actually the stability the big part of the stability of this cluster is because the presence of this fragment. Okay, but again, all these systems, all these structures are just local minimum. So if we expect that our molecules will be isolated or detected in gas phase, so the idea is try to have a global minimum. And so for this reason, part of my group started programming different ways of systematically explore the potential area surface. And our first applications of these genetic algorithms was to study these very small clusters, see a carbon surrounded by 4 boron atoms. So the problem with this system is that it has a big, strong multi-referential character, and although the system is relatively small, exploring the potential area surface was really quite complicated. So we found that the global minimum for the neutral system has a 3-coordinate carbon, but when we remove one of the electrons, this induced the stabilization of one planar tetracoordinate carbon atom. We decide to apply these methodologies to systems that are already experimentally detected, and this aluminum clustered with the presence of 1 lithium atoms. And there is nothing new, so there is this the stabilization of this planar tetracoordinate carbon atom. With gallium, the global minimum also contains such type of structure, but when we switch to indium or thallium, the global minimums adopt and square-based pyramid structure. So in this case, the cavity and the electronegativity plays an essential role in the stabilization of this species. And we will see some examples where these characteristics are more evident below. So if the planar tetracoordinate carbon is already a peculiarity, now imagine a planar pentacoordinate carbon atom. So in the 2008, the group of Senk and the University of Nebraska detected this cation. It's 1 carbon surrounded by 5 aluminum atoms with a positive charge. And Paul Slayer conducted a search to determine the most stable structure and found that the one with a planar pentacoordinate carbon is the most energetically stable. So 2 years later, we proposed that the substitution of one of these aluminum, or 2 actually, by beryllium also stabilized one planar pentacoordinate carbon atom. So to make isoelectronic the system to the carbon aluminum cluster, we try to change the charge. Okay, so this structure is actually a very deep minima, and this because the second isomer is around 12 kilocal per mole. But the most exciting aspect of this system, of this study, is that we rescue a very old rule proposed by Slayer and Boldulev, which states that it is necessary to have 18 valence electrons in order to stabilize a planar tetracoordinate carbon atoms. In our case, also this planar pentacoordinate carbon atoms is favored with this 80 valence electrons. So if we think that if these rules can work with these pentacoordinate systems, maybe we can also try to stabilize a planar hexacoordinate atoms. Unfortunately, this doesn't work, but in this case, the combination of 5 beryllium atoms and 1 aluminum atom provide this beautiful pentacoordinate, planar pentacoordinate structure. So in this case, this beryllium atom is out of the coordination sphere of the carbon, of carbon. So actually, until this year, the record for the coordination number of a planar carbon was 5. Okay. So, however, these 18 valence rules has allowed us to design several exciting systems. So, for instance, this one, where this is this series of clusters are based on this very uncommon framework that is actually a carbon surrounded by 5 beryllium atoms. Okay, this is a tetraanion, so it's a very unstable. And when we add one lithium atom, so we reduce the charge. Okay, so
Gabriel, 3 more minutes.
Okay,
3 more minutes.
So in this case, when we have 5 lithium atoms, so we establish a perfect start. So it means that it's possible to stabilize a very, very beautiful system with that. Okay, so these 18 valence rules also can apply in order to understand a more beautiful system. So in this case, we use this rule in order to stabilize a fluorine, a planar tetracoordinate fluorine. So in this case, we make a combination of many, many atoms, and only 6 combinations. These 6 combinations are stabilize a planar tetracoordinate fluorine atom. The most important that is, again, that all these combinations follow these 18 valence electrons. So all these studies are actually reviewed in this Nature Review Chemistry article, and there are also some studies about planar tetracoordinate carbon atoms. In this case, this was the first one. It was published by Paul Schleyer in 2000 in Science, and it's a carbon surrounded by 6 boron atoms. Okay, unfortunately, this molecule is not stable. Actually, the experiment shows that these systems are 34 kilocalories per mole less stable than this couple of systems. So some weeks ago, we suggest the first planar hexacoordinate carbon atom. So it's at the global minimum, and actually is a combination of some elements from the group 16 and also with metals from the group 1. And this actually, when oxygen is present, the carbon is positive, so there's some proportion with the metals around. But when we change the oxygen by sulfur or tellurium, so we found that the carbon now it's negative, and actually there's an attraction between the metals and the carbon atom. So it means that it's possible to stabilize such type of molecules. So here I showed you some boron wheels with some carbon and also silicon with a higher number of coordination. And these are not global minimum, they are local minimum, but it helps to understand how it's possible to stabilize a higher coordination number. And in this case, this study was published by Leticia Wang, and there's in the middle no one main group element. Actually, there is a one transition metal. So boron clusters has these characteristics of stabilized multicenter bond and also hypercoordinate atoms. So here I showed you some examples of pure boron clusters, and you can see that all of them are detected experimentally. And in all cases, there is multicenter bonds and also the presence of hypercoordinate boron atoms. So some years ago, we studied these molecules, boron 19 minus, and in this case, these molecules is very, very special in the sense that there are fluxional behavior. So with Thomas Heine, we suggest that this cluster is actually Wonkel motor in the sense that the barriers to move the inner fragment, it's very, very small. Okay? So we extrapolate this study to other boron clusters. In this case, we also found that boron 30 plus has exactly the same behavior. Okay, the barriers are very small; it's less than 1 kilocalorie per mole in both cases, and the same behavior was found for boron 11 minus. Okay, so it means that this fractional behavior is common in these boron clusters, and the reason is because of the presence of these multicenter bonds. So 4 years ago, one German group proved that this by infrared photodissociation spectroscopy, that actually it's possible to observe this fractional in this boron cluster, particularly in this boron 13 plus cluster. Okay, so we summarize some of these results about this fluctuality in this chemical research. So thank you very much. This is the group of theoretical chemistry at Mérida. So it's a very big group, and thank you for your attention.
Gabriel, thank you very much for this exciting talk about very unusual structures, and planar carbon is of course something that well, every student who would answer yes, they exist, planar carbon molecules, in particular with coordination number 4 or even larger, would probably have a problem in his exam. But it's very interesting to see that nevertheless it is possible. I see one question here from Savesh Kumar Pandai, who asks, except NBO approach, is there an easier way to do NIX-PIS? Well, I know NIX, but NIX-PIS I don't know exactly. Calculations for the estimation of aromaticity.
Yes, there are many other tools in order to estimate the aromaticity of electron delocalization in such systems. So one option is NIX. The other is the induced magnetic field, and also there are the ring currents, so it's possible to compute these currents. So the characteristic of all these systems is that there is a strong sigma delocalizations, and also in some, particularly in the carbon system, there are also pi delocalizations. But in the case of the boron clusters, the sigma delocalizations it's the dominated one. So when we classify the systems as aromatic or not, in the case of the boron cluster, they can particularly say that they are sigma aromatic.
Well, in the examples you showed us with the planar 4-fold coordinated carbon, and also in the other planar system that you showed us, is there any peculiarity in terms of electronic structure in the central atom, in the central carbon?
Yes, so many of these systems are stabilized by the effect of back donation. So the ligands try to remove electrons, but at the same time carbons try to make an overlap of the orbital. So for this reason, when there are a big difference on electronegativities, the system is not so stable. So for instance, we studied a big number of combinations for carbon systems, and we found around that follow these 18 valence electrons, and we found around 400 combinations that can be stabilized with a global minimum with a PTC. But in the case of fluorine atoms, there are only 6 combinations. So it means that the electronegativity difference is a very important concept in order to stabilize such type of system here.
Thank you. Could you unshare your screen so that we have the opportunity now also for the last question, then for the closing of the session to for all the others also to switch on their cameras so that we can see each other before we say goodbye. But I do have one more question for you, Gabriel, by Alfredo Taluiche. Sorry if the pronunciation is not correct. Due to large charge held by these structures, is it possible to obtain them experimentally? How those structures are affected by temperature? Well, that probably is a challenge for experimentalists, I guess.
Yes, many of the structures can be detected in the gas phase. Okay, so the problem with the system is that in the presence of other molecules, they collapse. So even if we have a dimer of these systems, so it's possible that they simply collapse. So Lesion worm actually detect many of these boron cluster and also some of these planar tetracarbonate carbon. So the answer is yes, it's possible to stabilize. And also, if we surround by metals and organometallic compounds, there are some examples. So we account around 200 of synthesized systems and around 300 systems detected in the gas phase.
Thank you. And I've just got one more question, and I think that will be the last question. Sultan Benko comments and asks, first of all, great talk. And then his question is, can you comment on the multi-reference character?
Yeah, this is a big problem. So we need to be careful about that. So when we propose such molecules, the first thing is to check that the stability of the wave functions. And in some boron clusters, this is quite common. So there are some systems that the multi-reference character is quite strong. So in such cases, the people use multi-reference computations, but only for a very small system. So, for instance, boron 19, there has some of these problems, but we compare actually the spectrum, the experimental spectrum with the theoretical spectrum are almost the same. So, for this reason, we know that the structure of the global minimum is correct. But yes, so we need to be careful about this property of the systems.
Okay, thank you very much. With that, I am going to close our session. And, well, wanted to minimize this here. No, it doesn't work. Okay. Thank you very much again, all three of you, for the wonderful talks. This was also for me personally a great experience to dive again into computational theoretical chemistry very deep. And the last word now is by Greta again. And Greta, please take over. And again, for all of us and all of you and all the technical staff who made this work and happen, and of course for all the many contributions to the discussions, a great thank you from myself. And the last word now belongs to Greta.
Thank you, Wolfram. I can actually hardly add anything to what you have said already. Just also, again, great thanks to my colleagues, Kira Welter and Anne Nijs, who organized everything and took care that everything ran smoothly. I was in the very privileged position that I just needed to rock. So that was great. Many thanks for that. Thank you very much also, Wolfram, for doing a great job in moderating the event. Keeping track of everything, doing the multitasking and so on. It was nice for me to just sit here and relax. So thank you to you as well. And also our speakers, great talks, super interesting. I was a bit wistful because I would love to also be in the thick of it and doing this sort of work as well. So it was really nice to hear your talks. And thank you very much to everybody who came and spent the afternoon with us, asked questions, engaged. But yeah, I look forward to our next session. And yeah, goodbye for today. Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Bye. Stay healthy.